At the start of a new year, join Boise State Public Radio as we explore the important topic of how to transform stress into strength in order to build a more joyful, resilient life. Join moderator Gemma Gaudette and panelists Kimberly Henderson, April Masaryk, and Sophia Godkin on Tuesday, January 21st from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Idaho State Museum for this informative discussion. More details and registration is free on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Here in the United States, sudden infant death syndrome is the leading cause of death in infants from 1 to 12 months old. It is a tragedy that often happens when a baby is put down to sleep, and according to Associate Professor Aaron Mannon, could have something to do with biomechanical factors, which include things like body position, feeding practices, and product designs, all of which can impact your baby's breathing. So that's why she's leading a new study. It's geared towards this very specific issue. And she is joining us now to talk more about this really important work. Erin, nice to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
I know this is a really difficult topic to talk about. So for our listeners, you might need to take a pause if this is triggering for you. But with that said, Erin, this is such an important conversation to be having. So can we just start out by you telling us about what inspired this study?
Absolutely. So my team at Boise State, we work in the Boise Applied Biomechanics of Infants Lab, or the Baby Lab, BABI. And what we do is we look at how babies move and use their muscles and what that means for product safety and development. And our research over the last 5 years has really shown that there are some product designs, products on the market that you can buy at Target or Walmart, that put babies in concerning positions that we know negatively impact the way that people breathe. So the inspiration for this study was to dive deeper into that question of which positions, which practices, what product design features specifically impact the way that babies breathe. If we know these things, there's the opportunity that we can reduce that SIDS rate and make products safer for babies.
So can we clarify a couple of things for folks who may not know? So you just mentioned the terminology SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. There's also another term, SIDS. Is there a difference between these two terms?
Great question. So we call that SUID. SUID is kind of the general term for any unexplained deaths that occur in infants under a year old, whereas SIDS is a more specific term that says we really didn't identify a specific factor that led to that death. So suffocation can also be a SUID type of death.
So what kind of role are you finding that environmental factors play in either SUID or SIDS?
Good question. So in the SIDS research world, there's something called the triple risk model, which essentially says that infants that suffer and die from SIDS have these three things in common. One, they're at a critical developmental period, and the highest risk is 2 to 4 months old. Lots of things are changing with babies at that age. Two is there's some sort of vulnerability in the infant. Maybe they were born with some disorder, or maybe they even have a common cold or an illness or a fever that puts them at a slightly higher risk. The third factor in the triple risk model is extrinsic factors, which this is where environmental factors come into play. And our lab and our research has shown and supports the idea that body position as it relates to products can be that environmental, that intrinsic factor.
So what about biomechanics? What part do they play in these kinds of tragedies? And also maybe explain to us what you mean by the term biomechanics.
Yeah, so biomechanics is a field of study that combines mechanics, so physics principles, Newton's laws, movement, and forces with the body. So we're applying what we know about how gravity impacts in the body with movement and muscle activity. And so we're looking specifically at using this tool of biomechanics to understand how infant posture, infant muscle activity, movement, and interaction with products will influence the way that they can move and ultimately how they breathe.
So let's talk about design features on infant products because you are looking at this as well. What kinds of design features can impact a baby's breathing?
So, in the last few years, my team has done some extensive research on inclined seated type of products. So, these are things like bouncers or swings or inclined sleepers. And we've shown that these products put babies in flexed trunk and a flexed head neck position. So, they're kind of in a scrunched up type of position. These postures we know have negative impacts on respiration. So, the design feature of this inclined seat is something that we want to look more into in this study. We're also looking at harnesses and how harness design, harness tightness, where the harness hits the baby, if that impacts the way that they expand their abdomen and rib cage to take a breath. So those are, I'd say, the two primary design features that we're looking at in this study.
You know, that's interesting, Erin, because I'm thinking back to when my children were babies and um, thinking, especially when they got like a cold, right? And they're all stuffed up. It's like, oh, well, should I put them in the car seat to sleep, right? To give, so they're not lying flat so they can breathe better. That seems intuitive, but what you're saying, that's almost counterintuitive. Like we should not be doing something like that.
Correct. So the research has consistently shown that inclining infants, even when they have a cold, is not helpful for breathing. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics doesn't recommend that infants are inclined for sleep, whether they have a cold or even whether they have reflux, because that's another common misconception.
So, what kind of risk factors are you specifically looking at in this new study?
So specifically, we're looking for body positions, design features, and even feeding practices that might negatively impact the way that infants breathe or even change the mechanics of breathing, whether they're inflating their abdomen more than their rib cage and how a specific posture might change that. We call that the work of breathing, right? So even if you see a baby and they seem to be breathing totally normally in this kind of unusual posture, if their body's working harder to breathe, to obtain the same amount of oxygen, that can be concerning, especially when we think about sleeping, when infants have less robust ability to self-correct from some dangerous postures.
So, Erin, I'm thinking about car seats in general, and folks still use car seats. But I'm sitting here as you're talking about this, and I'm thinking, okay, again, especially those infant car seats. I mean, my kiddos were strapped in there, right? Because you want to keep your kids safe when they're in the car, and your babies in particular. So, and they are in an inclined position a bit in these infant car seats. So is that something you're looking at as well? Because I just remember how strapped down my kiddos were in their car seats. And again, I'm not saying don't use a car seat, but this is just interesting with, I'm thinking about it probably was a little difficult for them to get a really good breath of air when they were in their car seat sometimes.
Great observation. So, car seats are designed for a very specific, very important purpose, and that is protection from high impact traumatic collisions inside of an automobile. They're designed for that. They do a very good job of protecting against that. What they're not designed for is optimal respiration and sleeping. And unfortunately, we see in the marketplace now parents have the options to take car seats out of the car and use them in everyday settings. And car seats simply weren't designed for that. And our research has actually shown that the postures that infants are put in car seats, while good for protection against impact, are negative when we think about breathing. So our lab recommends that folks don't use car seats outside of the car setting, but absolutely use a car seat in the car.
Okay, because I remember, like, especially, when they were little, they'll fall asleep in their car seat. The last thing you want to do is transfer that sleeping baby from the car seat to the crib. And for the most part, I would do that, but it you just don't want to wake up that baby. But what you're saying is that is what we should be doing.
Yes, and I'm a mom also of two, and this is honestly how the research started. And having a baby fall asleep, the last thing you want to do is wake that baby up. But the American Academy of Pediatrics also recommends that if you are in a situation where you're no longer in the car and the baby's in the car seat asleep, you need to take that baby out and place them in a firm, flat, safe sleeping surface as soon as reasonably possible.
So I only have about a minute left with you, Erin, and I know you have a new grant from the National Institute of Health, but I'm also wondering about what you're hoping your findings can do in regards to the impact or changing the infant product industry so that parents and caregivers are so much more well-informed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Our research, I hope, can provide guidance to product manufacturers and designers, as well as safety regulators, to understand what design features are negative or positive for infant respiration, so that rather than catching these things on the end of 100 babies have died in these products, we can start getting product designs onto the market that have already been vetted and are already safe for babies.
Well, Erin, I really want to thank you so much. And you're doing such important work. We've been speaking with Erin Manna, and she's associate professor in the Department of Mechanical and Biomedical Engineering at Boise State University. We've been talking to her about her effort to increase infant safety, and she is in the midst of a new study. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudet.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho Voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.